Hey everyone. So let me fill you in on the recordings we have coming up so that you can submit your questions. For starters, we have two authors who are coming on that had me texting Melody in all caps when she told me that she got them to come on the show. It's amazing. We're going to talk to R.F. Kuang, author of the Poppy Trilogy, Babel, Yellowface, and Catabasis. I want to get into the popularity of dark academia, but of course you can ask her anything you'd like. I'll also be talking to culture study fave Kat Sebastian, author of one of this month's romance book club picks about queer historical romance. So submit your questions for her as well. Okay, here's what else we've got cooking. An episode about adults, specifically ladies and non-binary people, getting into video games. An episode about car culture and more specifically the death of car culture, like what does life after cars look like? An episode about how to prepare for and or handle all the bureaucracy and paperwork around your parents dying. This is with the death doula. It's going to be really good. So you can submit all of your questions for these and for our Ask Ann Anything segment at tinyurl.com/culturestudypod. Can't wait to hear from you. This is the Culture Study Podcast, and I'm Anne Helen Peterson.
And I'm Jackie Davalos. I'm the host of IVF Disrupted, the Kindbody Story. It's a podcast about the fertility industry and a startup that grew a little too quickly.
Okay, I'll just quickly set the scene here. Kindbody is a fertility clinic startup with dozens of locations across the U.S. If you live in a major city, you might have walked past one. It started in 2018 and is backed by a ton of venture capital and private equity. Obviously, people should listen to the podcast, but just to tick through some of the things that you found out in your reporting, talking to patients and staff members. So again, according to your reporting, understaffed clinics, a culture of upselling products and procedures to meet internal financial targets, infrastructure issues in the buildings, embryos that were mislabeled or stored in improper conditions or accidentally destroyed. So tell me how you even started looking at Kindbody and all of this.
I wasn't even looking for a story in the fertility world. I was a tech reporter at the time, and Kindbody came onto my radar because they started kind of spamming me with a lot of ads on TikTok and Instagram. And at the time, I was 30, 31 years old. So right in its ideal demographic for targeting women who might be seeking egg freezing services or IVF. And just the concept of how much I was getting these ads, and it looked really beautiful. I mean, when I think about fertility services, I didn't really know what to expect, but this looked like the kind of place, that I would see in New York City where I lived. And that concept of something feeling like a spa, this wellness brand. I'm a millennial, so naturally I tend to gravitate toward those kind of startups anyway. And I got super curious. And, as a journalist, you just start making a couple calls. And fairly soon after that, I started to get the sense that things were not as the company was portraying them to be.
What year was this about?
This was the beginning of 2023.
I also feel like this was a time when a lot of these startups, like people were like, there's something rotten at the core, right? Like it started happening a little bit before, but I do think that this was part and parcel of that larger movement.
100%. I had actually done some reporting on other health tech companies the year before in 2022 when, if you're not familiar with what was going on in the tech world, just a lot of startups got a reality check that you can't be spending this much money. And, a lot of companies started struggling to raise money and some started going out of business. And I had done reporting around this one startup called Cerebral, which was doing a lot of prescriptions for controlled substances. And they got in trouble for that along with other startups. So naturally, I was already kind of skeptical about health tech working, especially when the stakes are so high. And when I saw that this was a venture-backed company, my spidey senses always go off when these sorts of startups are tackling something this sensitive and then tack on kind of the Silicon Valley vibe to it. As a reporter, I wanted to dig in a little more.
And we'll talk about this as we go through this episode a little bit more. But the thing about Kindbody specifically is they were trying to be almost like a one-stop shop, like a convenience store for fertility, as in they were trying to market to you for egg freezing, but then they also were trying to provide the services for people who were going through IVF later down the road.
Yes, they were undertaking something that no other company in the fertility industry had ever done. This idea of a one stop shop was really new because it is so hard to do. I mean,
Right.
they wanted to do gynecology, egg freezing, IVF, but also if you need like some counseling. And then they were later on going to do stuff for surrogacy. And so it was just kind of really ambitious. But it was also really exciting. We have to,
Mm,
give them a little credit for seizing on that moment where, women were really curious about taking control and wanting to take control of their health. And women's health is already a really kind of underinvested, undercovered area. And so I think their audience and their ideal customer was hungry for something like that.
totally. And I think like a lot of it is so opaque that when when you're in your 30s and you see something that's promising to like so many other services, especially startups that are like, well, if you just press this button, then things will work. Like the promise is alluring. But I also think, and this is something that so many startups have encountered, like there's a reason why these services have not been bundled together. There's a reason why things are difficult because it is a difficult process. And you can't just be like, oh, we're just going to do this. We're just going to offer this and it's going to work.
Yes, and what makes fertility even harder is that like it's only been around since really the 90s. I mean in the 70s and 80s it was like the kind of thing that like only veterinarians really had experience with because they were doing this stuff with animals, like
Yeah.
literal like farm animals. And so a lot of the experts that I spoke to who've been in the industry for decades were like, "Oh, this was like, this wasn't a thing until really the 90s when it started becoming like a far more commercial venture, much more mainstream,
Right.
more clinics started cropping up." And so because of that, it's kind of been stuck in its ways. And so to have this really flashy, buzzy, millennial friendly, aesthetic, vibey startup
Hmm.
disrupting it, I think you had its skeptics, but for the most part, people were really eager to hear them out.
Yeah, it's so hard for me because like I absolutely understand that. And then it also just grosses me out when people are like, yeah, having babies, like that's a profit center, right? Like, like it's just it whenever like there are things like this that are so complicated, so emotional, so weighted with all of this stuff. And then to have it turn into a profit center just makes it even like all of the problems I think even worse.
100%. I mean, it's like a lot of areas in American healthcare, it's a business. But what
Yeah.
makes fertility, I think, like even more complicated is the fact that there is no ceiling, virtually no ceiling to how much people will pay. And
Right.
when you're dealing with such a vulnerable population, I mean, women will go through anything. I heard heartbreaking stories of not just the money that they pay, but their bodies and what they go
Yeah.
through with the hormones and the disappointment. I mean, they will do anything to have a
Yeah.
baby.
I hear a lot about it, both in my friend group, also in the comments on Culture Study. Like this is such a vulnerable area, and there's a lot of reporting that, and a lot of personal essays, collections, all sorts of stuff. Like there's so many directions that you could take an episode on this larger topic of IVF. We are specifically focusing on the industry because I actually think this is something that is understood, misunderstood. Like people do not have, there is not enough transparency about how it functions as an industry and a lot of the bureaucracy. I think people who have been through it will talk about it, but it's not something that you necessarily know about if you haven't been through it. So that's our focus for today. And we have a lot of questions that we've chosen that are going to allow us to drill down more on that. So this first question comes from Andrea.
As a person with unexplained secondary infertility who did not want to undergo IVF, I found it quite frustrating the lack of alternative options that were available to me and my partner when we were trying for a second child. We did all the tests and everything came back, quote unquote, normal for your age, for both of us. We were told we should just jump straight into IVF to avoid wasting more time and money with less effective options like IUI. It seems that IVF provides an expensive, invasive, and time-consuming yet effective solution to infertility. Is this the main reason for the lack of research into other treatments? Or is it just a symptom of a lack of research in women's health in general? Where does male fertility fit into this?
So we should define some terms here first. So secondary infertility is when you have a baby without any problems, and then the second baby, it's just more difficult. And then the other thing that we should define is IUI, which I understand is like it's interuterine insemination. So it's when like they take concentrated sperm and they put it directly into the uterus. It's like an assist in a slightly
Yeah.
different way than IVF. And less
Yes.
invasive, totally less invasive.
Doesn't require any egg retrieval. Yeah.
Yeah. So her question is about like, why is there this jump? It's almost like people like the jump right now in women's health. There's like, I've seen a bunch of reporting about like the jump to always go to cesarean when it's not necessary, when that's not necessarily the best solution. Why is there this jump to go to IVF?
Well, she kind of hit one of the problems on the head there with the fact that there's very little research into the causes of infertility. And I'm not just talking about infertility for women. I mean, male factor infertility is also something that is really not well understood. And so when you think about the menu of options to work with, it really depends on the person that walks in the door, but IVF works. I mean, it is a very effective treatment. And so one of the things that doctors told me as I was reporting was, why would I have a woman waste her time, especially if she's older? Like, let's say she was in her late 30s, early 40s. The other stuff might not work for you as well as IVF. And if you want to have a baby this year, like, let's just jump right to it.
Right.
However, there is an incentive as well to resort to IVF because it is by far the most lucrative type of treatment in the fertility world. And so when I was doing reporting on Kindbody, I got to look at documents that listed out how much the clinics were making when you charge for IUI versus IVF. And because IVF requires an egg retrieval, that's the most expensive part. And if you're the patient walking in the door, it's not just the egg retrieval I'm paying for. It's genetic testing, it's the medications, which usually are not covered by insurance. Most people are self-pay. And so there's a lot of ways that the clinic can also make money off of IVF, whereas you can't really collect on those certain add-on services like embryo glue or Neupogen wash or some of these other things that some clinics will say will help your chances to get pregnant, but the science really does not back that up. So I understand the skepticism that people have when the first option that they're given is IVF. Again, doctors will tell you this is such a tailored thing. Like it really depends on so many things about like your history, your hormone, if you have hormonal issues, PCOS. And so what women told me when their spidey senses went off, it was like they didn't even ask. It was just kind of this was the only option.
Yeah. Gosh. Well, and it also, there's something about like that description of a doctor being like, well, if you want to have a baby on this timeline and you're getting older, like you got to do this right now. Why, quote unquote, waste your time? And I understand that, but it also feels like optimization culture in this kind of icky way that I could feel someone who is going through this process and doesn't want to go through the like invasive and expensive and time consuming process of IVF. They want to be like, well, let's try this little step first. And if you're thrown directly into IVF, that's when you're like, oh, is this because this is the best like deal for you?
Totally. I mean, it's it's a cash cow. I don't know how else to put it.
Yeah.
IVF is extremely lucrative, and certain clinics kind of take it to another level because there are so many other ways to profit off of this. But also because there is so much demand, they can, put this out as the only option, and people really trust their doctors when, I think, more so than any other kind of patient I've seen in the health world. Fertility patients have so much trust in their doctors because it is this very nebulous world. It's super opaque. And so if a doctor tells you that this is the best option, you're just going to go with it.
Yeah. The Culture Study podcast is sponsored by Remy. So all of my friends right now, we're all obsessed with our sleep. I think this is just like being in your 40s. You become like so into tracking it all the time. And every day we'll be like, oh, what's your sleep number? Like we wear these watches that give us like the number that you have. And like there are all sorts of things that can change your sleep. Sometimes it's your cycle, sometimes it's exercising, sometimes it's alcohol, sometimes it's small children that wake you up in the middle of the night. All of those things can disrupt your sleep. But the other thing that can make your sleep really bad and also have you waking up in the morning with like just that horrible sense of like headache and tension is involuntary teeth clenching and grinding. One of my friends has been promising herself that she's going to deal for this forever. And I finally have convinced her to try Remy. If, like my friend, you're part of the 30% of Americans who grind their teeth, then your smile needs protection too. Remy's custom night guards are clinically tested and FDA cleared to prevent teeth grinding, reduce jaw tension and facial muscle strain, and improve sleep quality. You'll get the same professional quality and comfort as a night guard from the dentist, but Remy costs you 80% less and is much more convenient than having to go to the dentist office. This is how it works. It's very easy. You receive your impression kit. It arrives straight at your door. You follow Remy's step-by-step instructions to get your perfect impression. Then Remy crafts and ships your custom-fit night guard. You get it back. You start protecting your teeth. Start the new year right and use code CULTURE to get 50% off your purchase of a new night guard. That's 50% off at shopremi.com/culture with code CULTURE. Thank you, Remy, for sponsoring this episode. Today's episode is sponsored by ZBiotics. So speaking of things that affect your watch, drinking too much alcohol or drinking too much alcohol without taking ZBiotics pre-alcohol. Melody, you have a story for us?
I do. A couple of weekends ago, I went to a Mexican restaurant with some friends to celebrate a friend's birthday. And normally on Friday nights, I have to edit another podcast, so I never get to do anything fun. But I wanted to do this. And I ordered a margarita, not knowing it was the size of a fishbowl. But it was delicious. And so I had one, and then I had another one. But I had stashed ZBiotics in my purse, and I took it first. And when I woke up on Saturday, I woke up on time, and I was able to finish the podcast I needed to edit without losing the whole rest of my Saturday.
Amazing. And this is key. You took it before you started drinking the alcohol.
Yes, I took it with the chips and salsa before the margarita.
ZBiotics pre-alcohol probiotic drink is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut, and it's a buildup of this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for rough days after drinking. Pre-alcohol produces an enzyme that breaks this byproduct down. So again, just remember to make pre-alcohol your first drink of the night, drink responsibly, and then you'll feel your best tomorrow. If you're ready to try it, go to zbiotics.com/culture study, and you'll get 15% off your first order when you use Culture Study at checkout. Plus, it's backed by a 100% money-back guarantee, so there's no risk. Subscriptions are also available for maximum consistency. Remember to head to zbiotics.com/culture study and use code culture study at checkout for 15% off. Okay, next question builds on this. It comes from Stephanie.
In IVF, desperation is a business model. Clinics know it and patients feel it at every turn, especially when you're encouraged to try just one more round before giving up. For context, I'm a 2-time IVF mom. Is there any way to talk openly about the financial incentives and upselling in fertility care without making patients feel judged for doing what they can to build a family, all while calling the system out for what it is?
I like that Stephanie called attention to this tension because I do think like there is a gentleness with which we should approach this subject because at the one time, yes, like Kindbody was exploiting people's desperation and like screwed up a lot of people's lives. And you hear that in the reporting that you've done. And like, this is what you get, I think, in a podcast. You get to hear those voices and you get to hear that desperation and what people were driven to. And like, I don't blame them for taking that route, but also like, we have to talk very plainly about how that desperation is taken advantage of at the same time.
I mean, I think about Lacey Mickelson's story, the woman who eventually was able to conceive, but it's almost like this shame that they carry. Like, I should have known, I should have asked, I put myself through this, I put my family through this.
Yep.
I think there's a lot of guilt that these women carry, but you don't know what you don't know. And until they went through that, many people just didn't know what to ask or what was normal. And so absolutely, like, I think both things can exist. We can hold space for their experience and give credit to this great treatment, but also call out the fact that the incentives currently in place in this industry take advantage of people's vulnerability and exploit what they're able to put up with.
Do you think some of it is that I think as a society, we are much more open about talking about IVF, but it's still like the details of it are not something that is discussed as much. Like people will be like, there used to be embarrassment about even saying like we're doing IVF. That to me seems to be disappearing within many contexts. At the same time, the like we're doing that, like anything over a couple rounds, I think sometimes there it does become this like kind of we don't want to talk about it publicly.
Yeah, I think, I heard this a lot. Some women didn't want to share their full names because they hadn't told their families. There is
Yeah.
somewhat of a, I like a religious component.
Yep, that too.
One of the
That too.
women that I interviewed was from a very religious community who, she was terrified. I mean, the emotion in her voice when she was like, you cannot tell anybody. And eventually she agreed to be on background at least. But it was really important to her because of her beliefs. And, a lot of people don't realize that IVF gets caught up in the abortion politics debate.
Yeah.
And I don't have to go into it too much for this particular question, but there is a lot of that. There is kind of the same critics and skeptics that will say, if you have an abortion, you're killing a potential child. There's some of that wrapped up in IVF because in the process of creating embryos, you sometimes have to discard some, and to some that's tantamount to murder. And so depending on where you are, for example, Tennessee, I spoke to some patients for the reporting generally. Kindbody doesn't have a clinic there, but they were really reticent to talk about this stuff in comparison to like a couple from New York or Chicago.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's such a good point. What about the upselling part too? Like, how does that work?
So upselling, I mean, the add-on services in IVF are some of the it's a racket. It's a complete racket. I have not had one doctor tell me that these things actually work. So for example, Neupogen wash, embryo glue, allegedly helps like the embryos stick to your uterine lining better. Sometimes you're sold supplements that will help you, along the process. There's a lot of these things. Genetic testing, there's a little bit of a debate as to whether you need it or not. It's somehow now become the standard of care when many doctors tell me not everybody needs it, yet many clinics sell it as if everybody does. And
Right.
so that doesn't just add hundreds of dollars, it has thousands of dollars. Genetic testing is upwards of like $4,000 to $5,000. And when you're paying already, an average of $23,000 per cycle, you're like, all right, what's another $1,000, to improve my chances?
This is not a perfect metaphor, but it reminds me of like if you take your car in to get fixed and you don't know a lot about cars, and someone who seems to know a lot about cars comes in and says, "These are all the things that you need to do to your car." And you're like, "Well, I don't know what like what's bullshit and what's not," right? And so of course, like you don't want your car to break down on you, and you also don't want to jeopardize in any way the possibility of conception. And I think that people just get stuck in that, like, well, like you said at the very beginning of the episode, you don't know what you don't know. And so
Yes.
you're vulnerable to like that sort of. Okay, we haven't even said too, like, is there any regulation? Like, who is regulating these clinics? Who is saying like maybe you have to clarify that this is not necessary, or like,
No one. There's, I actually spoke to a lawmaker last December, actually, for a different story related to just kind of what regulations do exist
yeah,
or what consumer protections, because there is no regulation. Effectively, it's like you have state health agencies sometimes going in and making sure that like the blood testing and urine analysis, that certain things in a lab go right. But when it comes to the embryology lab, that's like the beating heart of an IVF clinic. That's completely untouched by the
wow,
government.
wow,
And there's a reason for that. It is so touchy politically. The lawmaker I spoke to last year was a Democrat, Senator Wyden from Oregon.
yep,
He had put in some of the most, I think, well-intentioned consumer protections back in the 90s when IVF was still super new. And what that did was make sure that doctors couldn't falsely advertise their success rates. You had doctors back then saying, "Oh, I can get you pregnant, in 2 cycles. I have 100% success rate
right,
and people go through with it, and then they realize, like, the guy was a con artist. So what that law put in place was now you have to report your success rates. And that still exists today, but that doesn't protect people from, upselling. That also doesn't regulate what goes on in the embryology lab.
hmm,
I mean, it doesn't track errors. So when
yeah,
something goes wrong, no one knows about it.
yeah. God. Okay, we'll get into more of that too as we keep going, but let's get to our next question, which is from Anna.
We went through IVF this summer for known male factor infertility due to a genetic condition. The economy of the industry seems so intentional and predatory that even though I love my team, I still feel yucky. Anything related to the male factor infertility side was self-pay. And while we were lucky to have fertility coverage through our insurance and to have a doctor in our area that accepts it, the lab we had to use, because it's attached to our clinic, only accepted the one insurance the doctor didn't take, so all our lab fees were self-pay. Is this the norm across the industry, or is it just slow to catch up to insurance covering fertility treatments?
Sadly, it's typical.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think it reveals something else about how the industry has kind of evolved. It's really around women's bodies. The male factor infertility accounts for like a pretty big chunk of all infertility cases. So it's not like it's all women's fault. Like many times, the male partner has a lot to do with that, but a lot is not known about what causes it. And because of that, you don't know how to treat it. And what you do know how to do is work with like the woman's reproductive system that we know pretty well. And it's a far more studied and area that like has had practice versus like treating the male side. But the insurance aspect of this as well, I mean, insurance is barely catching up. This idea that insurance covers IVF is really only something that's happened within like the last decade or so. There's some states that actually mandate insurance companies cover fertility treatments, like Illinois. Illinois is like, you can get a certain number of cycles or a certain dollar amount covered. But many states don't do that. And there's a lot of lobbying to like have other states cover it. But even when it is covered, there's just like a lot of red tape that comes in between that as well. Like, medication ends up being in the tens of thousands of dollars because sometimes it's not covered by that
Because it's
particular
not
insurance.
part of the procedure. It's like, does
Yeah,
it separate between procedure and medical, like the medications that you have to take in
right.
order to prep for the procedure? It's so dumb. I'm sorry. So one of the things that really struck me about the reporting is how Kindbody partnered with different employers. And employers thought like, oh, well, we're partnering with this company. Like, what a great deal. Like, we're going to be able to like get the egg freezing and then later IVF. Like, it's just like, and the employer also pushes this as a benefit. Can you talk a little bit about that
Oh
component?
yeah. Kindbody had an interesting business model from like the employer benefit side and then having people come in and pay out of pocket.
Yeah.
They really pushed this employer benefit thing because it was starting to catch on in the industry
Yeah.
and more companies wanted to offer that benefit.
Yeah.
But not every fertility clinic does that. And they were pretty unique in that they were partnering with companies in that way, kind of on the scale that they were. And look, like, it gave people the additional option. But what I did also realize, if you did not have a good experience, you were kind of stuck. I
Yeah.
remember interviewing people from, like, there was one woman whose husband worked at Tesla, and, they had this great benefit, but like their care was terrible. They were so unhappy, and they were like, what are we going to do? We're stuck with this benefit. And
Totally.
either we pay out of pocket or we just, put up with it.
Well, and it's so striking to me the ways in which like these tech companies partner with other tech companies, right? Like, or like venture capital funded companies. So when I was at BuzzFeed, the company partnered with this like on demand urgent care, right? That like, oh, you just like put in your thing and then you get an appointment anywhere in the city. And it was so bad, but you couldn't do anything. And they were like, look at how we're giving you good health care. And we're like,
Like they
it
want to look cool.
sucks. Right. No, I know. And they like came to the office and like did a cool presentation. Like everything about it was so icky. But you can't like they're trying to say like look at this cool benefit that we are giving to all employees and then it sucks and you can't do anything
Yes.
about it.
I mean, to the way Kindbody pitched it, and to their credit, they were wanting to expand access. So they were like, if you live in a state and you don't have mandated insurance by the state, then if you work at one of these companies, look, now you have this additional benefit. In their
Yeah.
eyes, this was like leveling the playing field a little bit, and expanding access seems like the top priority I heard about the most from everyone in the industry. Like, there are not enough doctors, this stuff is too expensive, we need to get fertility care in, make it accessible to as many people as possible. And this was like one of the strategies. Now, was it totally effective? That's a different story.
Right. Okay, next question actually is a very good segue into this. This is about why the service is bad, essentially, which there's a lot of conversation in your reporting about this. This question comes from Rebecca.
I have two questions. First, why do so many IVF clinics have such terrible customer service when they are getting paid so much money, often out of pocket? Is it because they may not have a huge amount of competition? Is it because they're dealing with desperate people who just keep coming back, even though they are sometimes dealing with really poor communication and service? What is up? Second question, what are your thoughts on the lower cost clinics that are popping up? CNY Fertility is a big name, but I hear of others too. Are they good for patients? Do you think they will push down costs overall as people get more options?
So let's deal with number one first. And the reason I was thinking about this is like thinking about your reporting and the amount of turnover that's happening. People are trying to do a good job, but when you are in an organization that has as much turnover as Kindbody had and is also trying to cut costs and trying to have hockey stick growth, you're just going to oftentimes get poor experiences and people are locked into them, as we were just discussing. So can we talk a little bit about the customer service and then we'll get into the second question?
So this problem is not just it's not just unique to Kindbody.
Yeah.
Broadly in the industry, we see this because the demand for fertility services has completely skyrocketed over the last 5 to 10 years. And because of that, there's just not enough doctors and also like nurses with this very specific fertility experience. Like it takes a very specific skill set. And there's just not enough people out there. When you look at the funnel of doctors coming into this field, like you have to go through a very specific residency and fellowship, and then this other like layer of experience that takes time to train these professionals. And doctors tell me like there's just not enough of us. And so because of that, you end up having doctors take on so many IVF cases and patients that some of the perhaps bedside manners, some of like the care, the softer stuff kind of goes by the wayside. Further down the funnel with nurses and clinic coordinators, I mean, these clinics are just overwhelmed. So with so many patients coming in, you don't really have the nurses and other kind of lower level clinic workers making as much money as fertility doctors who they make a lot of money. But that was a big complaint that I had coming from the people I spoke to, that like the hours you're putting in, the amount of emotional care that you're giving these people, like these nurses would get so invested as well, and they burned out really quickly. Same goes for embryologists. It's a field that really burns you out. And so the word that kept coming up when I would speak to people who had just like left the industry entirely were like factories. Like some of these clinics were like factories just churning through patients. And then when it came to like the very more Kindbody specific problems that you also see with other private equity backed clinics is the push to cut costs. You don't need as many nurses. You don't need as many embryologists. All of that puts additional pressure on fewer people who have to take care of all this overwhelming amount of cases to begin with. And private equity's presence in fertility is only growing. So it's not a problem that's going to get any better.
And we should say too that, this leads to burnout. It also leads to mistakes.
Yes. Yes, especially when it comes to people that work in the embryology lab. I mean, those are the people with like the pipettes and the petri dishes, and they're the ones that are actually creating embryos. The amount of stress that they have on their shoulders, anxiety that they carry. I've never spoken to like anyone in the medical field that kind of had this kind of pressure on them, because they don't interact with the patients as much as the doctors do. They're not super face-to-face, they're kind of in the back room, but they know the stakes. And so when you make the tiniest mistake, they really carry it. But there is no regulation that, limits the number of cases a certain embryology should have. There are guidelines that are set by this industry group that say maybe you should do, this number of cases per person. This is how you should staff. But no one is actually going in there and making sure that clinics are adhering to those guidelines.
Yeah. And like, if you're looking for a clinic, you're not looking to see if it adheres to these guidelines.
No, you don't even know that they exist. Like,
yeah, you do. They're not like broadcasting it. It's not like at the bottom, like a smoking advertisement or something. The Culture Study Podcast is sponsored by Article. I look around my house and I see so many pieces of Article furniture that have stood the test of time, that I love, that people ask about all the time. I've talked about my bar cart. I have this really lovely lamp that has like 3 legs. It's kind of like a tripod style, but it's cool and different than any other tripod lamp that you'll see on the market. I love it. And it's just like a perfect height that's not too tall and it's not too short. And it works in so many different places. I've had such great experiences every time that I've ordered from Article. Stuff is in stock. This is huge. It does not take forever to get to you. If you have any problems with delivery, they have incredible customer service. They also ship all over the US and all over Canada. Huge bonus. They have a really thoughtful design approach that makes it incredibly easy to mix and match and create a space that actually feels like cohesive and stylish, which is always really hard for me. I'm not naturally cohesive and stylish, but with Article's help, it actually is pretty straightforward. Article pieces also arrive meticulously packaged and not in 1 billion pieces. There's usually like maybe 2, maybe 3, maybe you have to screw in 1 or 2 things, not 50. They also have support whenever you need it. If you have a question, if you need help with your design choices, Article's customer care team is available 7 days a week, offering knowledgeable support. And they also even have free interior design services to help you get your home just right. And with Article's 30-day satisfaction guarantee, you can shop with confidence, knowing that if you're not completely in love with your new furniture, you can easily return it. The peace of mind ensures that you can invest in your home without hesitation. So if you're in the market for a beautiful new sofa, a great tripod lamp that doesn't look like anything that anyone else has, a dining table or bed, head to article.com. Today's episode is sponsored by ZocDoc. So I just saw a piece in the New York Times that was all about backsliding on New Year's resolutions and how this is the time when people like lose their ambition to keep up with their resolutions. Personally, I'm keeping strong with my resolution to say hi to a bird every day. The other resolution I have is to actually figure out some doctor's appointments that I've been avoiding for a long time. I need to get another mole check. I went to a dermatologist before and I didn't really love them, so I need to find a new one. The easiest way to do that, to cross this stuff off your backsliding New Year's resolution list, is to go to ZocDoc. You can go anytime, 24/7, and find a doctor that you love to make anything on your health plan happen. It's a free app and website that helps you find and book high quality in-network doctors so you can find someone you actually love. We're talking about booking in-network appointments with more than 150,000 providers across all 50 states. Whether you're looking for a mole check like me, dentistry, as I always am, primary care, eye care, or one of the more than 200 specialties offered on ZocDoc, you can easily search by specialty or symptom to build the care team that's right for you. If you want to see the doctor in person, it's great. You can find that. If you'd rather have a video visit, you can find doctors who provide that too. You can also view thousands of verified patient reviews to give you a real sense of who your doctor is. Whatever it is, you can feel confident that you can book with a doctor you know you'll love. So when you're ready, you can see their real-time availability and click to book instantly. There's no phone tag and no waiting around. Appointments made through ZocDoc also happen fast, typically within just 24 to 72 hours of booking. You can even sometimes score same-day appointments. Stop putting off those doctor's appointments and go to ZocDoc.com/culture to find and instantly book a doctor you love today. That's ZocDoc.com/culture. ZocDoc.com/culture. Thanks, ZocDoc, for sponsoring this message. What about these low-cost ones? Are most of them also private equity backed?
So some of the lower cost ones, so CNY is interesting because they really pride themselves in making this so much more affordable. In turn, I think that gets patients talking to other clinics and they start asking more questions. So there is a benefit to having this kind of player in the market.
Right.
And I've had other doctors from like competitors be like, look, I appreciate what they're doing. But our advantage is that, we offer more tailored care. And like some of this is, clinics bad mouthing each other.
Yeah.
But on the whole, many doctors agree that like, you know what, it's nice that they offer a cheaper option when, if they can do it, great. Is the owner of CNY making as much money as a doctor that, owns one by private equity? I don't know. But at the end of the day, you are going to have some trade-offs. I'm not sure if CNY does this specifically, but I do know that there are fertility clinics I researched that offer IVF at a lower price by not having the fertility doctor, a reproductive endocrinologist, do all the work, and instead having OBGYNs, which are different from these more specialized fertility doctors, to do some of the other stuff. Now, the pros of that is, okay, great, you get care that's cheaper, and you still get to see a doctor, not a nurse or a nurse practitioner. But the downside to that is OBGYNs are not always trained with the same level of detail that fertility specialists are. And so, Kindbody actually tried to do this, but it never really got off the ground. They tried to have their OBGYNs do egg retrievals, which is not something that they typically do, to bring down costs and to, be able to manage more of that volume. And doctors really weren't having it. I mean, some of the OBGYNs I spoke to were like, we're not doing this. We're not trained to do this. So there are ways to cut corners that can eventually, really affect the patient in the end.
And there's no regulation of that. Like, you could just have an OBGYN do it.
Yeah.
And the only person pushing back would be the doctors themselves.
Yeah. And, there's some OBGYNs out there who also told me hey, look, I've had some really good on the job training. But it's not accredited by the board that, certifies doctors. I think it's called, I'm not, I think it's called ACOG, but I don't want to get it wrong.
Yeah.
But basically there's a board certification that every doctor has to have.
Yeah.
There's no such thing. You can kind of get this boot camp style training, and it's perfectly legal. And patients really don't know the difference because they're just going to see Dr. So-and-so, and they're not going to question what kind of fertility, reproductive endocrinology training they've had.
And we should say in many cases, that's fine. If you don't have a complicated case or something like that, but then it becomes not fine. When it becomes not fine, this is the problem, I think. And why relying on the individual to really have to ask these questions and to try to find this information. Not only does it lead us into our current healthcare moment where everyone is essentially just asking questions, figuring out healthcare for themselves. That's a crisis in all ways. But the only fix is a much more systemic one, which, as we've talked about, our current government is not willing, or any government has not been willing to figure out how to how to govern this in a way that would make sense for more people.
No, I think it's too touchy because it's so intertwined with abortion politics, and Republicans and Democrats alike don't want to wade into that thorny mess. It's complicated, but there are easy ways to do this that wouldn't require a system overhaul.
Yeah.
I bring up air tracking as a really easy thing to do because we've seen it happen in Europe, and it's a basic thing that it's almost like a very simple consumer protection that allows you to hold a clinic accountable or at least kind of have the assurance that someone is making sure that they're following the guidelines that they're supposed to be following, and what trends look like over time. Does this clinic have more instances of errors? It's complicated because then, would that mean it restricts access because then you have some clinics shutting down? That's one of the concerns. But at the end of the day, these are people's hopes and dreams of having children that are kind of also stuck in the fray.
I don't see the demand for it ever. I don't see it decreasing. Although, Melody just pointed this out to me, that the Speaker of the House just stripped IVF coverage from members of the military with the defense policy bill that was unveiled in December. And oftentimes, whether or not, government employees have a coverage that drives
a lot
demand for a lot. What do you think? Do you think of it as something that's going to continue to expand only in this privatized way, or do you think that it's going to become just a larger component of American culture?
It's really a toss-up because IVF is incredibly popular. In 2024, there were a flurry of surveys that were looking at how popular it was or what Americans thought about fertility care in the wake of the Alabama Supreme Court ruling.
Right.
And then at the time, obviously, you had Biden and Trump running, and everyone was kind of coming out with their we're going to do this for IVF. And Trump at one point called himself the father of IVF because he knows that this is a really,
It's a popular position. Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
And I mean, I remember doing some reporting around what this administration was doing back in February when they announced that they were going to like expand IVF access with an executive order. But the executive order literally said nothing of use. It was like, we're going to come up with a plan in X amount of months. And then that deadline came in May and then nothing happened.
Yeah.
And so it just kind of seems like we're going backwards, or maybe they're backtracking a little bit. But I do think that this industry is already kind of like the flywheel has been set in motion. And even if there is not kind of the government backup, it hasn't stopped the industry from expanding, particularly because you have these deep-pocketed investors coming in and propping it up with like a lot of cash to like invest and then molding it in the way that they want it to work. And when that happens, you're just going to end up with a field that is skewed toward profit. Whereas if you had government as a bigger participant, it would balance it out a bit. If you don't want to call it socialist, level kind of Europe style care, fine. But right now it's really one-sided, and I just don't think that's boding well for patient care. I mean, there's studies out there as well that kind of show people get upsold more when you go to a private equity-backed clinic.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to get the link from you for that, because I think that that's like a very strong piece of evidence. And also, this is a nice segue into our last question, which is about trying to figure out how you actually find a doctor with integrity. So this question comes from Jessica.
For people entering the world of fertility doctors, what are the protections in place to ensure that you find an honorable doctor? Our first infertility doc, the only one in a small town, made so many errors along the way. It was hard not to feel taken advantage of for the sake of more money in a largely self-pay adventure.
So you are not the expert of all experts, and I don't think anyone expects you to be, but based on your reporting, what sort of questions would you tell people to ask when they start looking for doctors or clinics?
Well, I know I just poo-pooed it a few minutes earlier, but the CDC does track success rates. And that is at least one data point that patients can be sure is legit. It will tell you how successful they've been with live births, with, using frozen embryos, using fresh embryo, all these different kind of ways. You can rest easy that if a doctor says you have a 50 whatever % chance, that they're telling the truth because they have numbers reported to the government backing that up. However, when you go into a clinic, you're relying a lot on a doctor telling you what your chances, kind of giving you an assessment of this is kind of what your baseline chances are. And be really honest. They should be really honest about what they can afford, about the timing, about is it make or break for you to have a child in a year or 2 years? Do you have other children that you need to take care of? Kind of like, what's your bandwidth to be able to like undergo egg retrievals? Like being really open with a doctor and upfront about what you can handle financially and otherwise. And, really taking reviews seriously. I think when people look at a negative review online, you can kind of maybe downplay it because no one posts a nice review.
Right.
It's
or
always
there's
the bad
so
ones.
much emotion. There's so much emotion wrapped up
Exactly.
in this, right? Yeah.
Exactly. But there are some good websites out there that just specialize in fertility reviews. They vet it. They provide like really good summaries of the offerings and prices and comparisons city by city. Fertility IQ was an amazing resource for me as I was going through this because, it's not like Yelp, but it does have like specific doctor names and it has specific clinics, and that's one resource. But, pay attention to kind of what the vibe of the clinic is. Do the people working there seem really stressed out? when you were given instructions, are they clear? Do they make little mistakes? Like take your medication on a Thursday, but it was really like take it on Wednesday. Those sorts of things add up. Listen to your gut. So many women told me, I knew that the little mistakes were red flags, but I didn't really, take them seriously because I just thought they're not that important. When you're in a fertility clinic and getting this care, everything is important. It doesn't really matter how small.
Yeah.
It's hard. I'm not sure if that answers her question, but
Is there a way to I'm thinking specifically of the upsells on the things that don't necessarily work. Like how do you is there a question that people can ask about efficacy? Like how can you
yes,
pose that
studies.
question?
Give
Yeah.
me the studies because when you ask them, I mean, I when I was trying to figure out does Neupogen wash or embryo glue, does that actually work? Doctors very quickly gave me the link to several studies. Like it took 30 seconds to find these studies that show, yes, these maybe increase chances in like a couple people, but on the whole, this is not something that should be sold as a slam dunk.
Mhm.
And it was, if you ask them for a study, they're going to have to explain that to you. And don't be afraid of like diving into some of these studies yourself. I would say also ask for their protocols, like give me my array of options before you just kind of give me this one. Ask them, can I do IUI? Can I do this Clomid treatment? I've heard of this. Doctors are used to that. I actually, one woman told me that, she would go in equipped with what her friends had done, and it actually provided a really good baseline for the doctor to then explain and then kind of backtrack. Well, then maybe you can also try, IUI before IVF. Explaining kind of what other people have gone through is an entry point for doctors to kind of explain themselves because this is expensive stuff. Like if you're being pushed into it, you should know why.
Yeah. Can you call a clinic and say, "Are you backed by private equity?" Because I think sometimes for me, like when I'm trying to figure out if a company is backed by private equity, oftentimes you'll Google it and it'll be some sort of venture, right? And then maybe actually that venture is owned by the larger private equity firm. There's just this trail because they're trying to erase any sign
Yeah.
that says we are private equity because that word has taken on a certain connotation, especially to certain people. So any advice on figuring out if a particular clinic is private equity backed?
One, ask them.
Yeah.
They can't lie to you. I mean, all the big names, are
No.
now owned by PE, Boston IVF, CCRM, Shady Grove. All of them are kind of under this PE umbrella these days.
Yeah.
But also, you will find pretty quickly that the ones that are private equity backed are typically the ones that are getting a ton of bad reviews because of just how
Yeah.
how much the customer service aspect ends up outweighing the outcome itself. Even women who did get pregnant, they're like, but I should not have had to go through this, rigmarole with billing. Oh my God, billing was one of the
Yeah.
chief
Yeah. Yeah.
complaints.
Yep.
Typically the PE backed clinics will have that trend that, those type of complaints, like a trail behind them.
Yeah. And a discrepancy too between what's quoted and what's actually charged, which is if you
Yeah,
budget
it's
for a
always
certain amount of
different.
money. God, whew. What has been the reception since your reporting came out, since the show came out?
I mean, this part makes me emotional because I still get messages.
Yeah.
It's been amazing. I mean, patients have, I posted one TikTok one day, terribly edited, rambling. And the comments were like, oh my God, I thought I was the only one. This happened to me too. And not just with Kindbody. People were spewing, listing off, naming names of their clinics, their doctors. And it unleashed this wave of support and people from Kindbody, employees who were still there, emailing me and reaching out saying, oh, wow, yeah, everything that you said has been happening. It's getting worse. The company's going to go under. I wish I could talk to you, but I know I need this job. So much validation that the company was not doing right by patients. And also even some of my fiercest skeptics from the industry who thought that I was fear-mongering and talking bad about fertility care when it's already coming under fire from detractors and Republicans and conservatives. I got a lot of heat from them, but they said, you know what? If you have to highlight a bad apple, so be it, because it's going to make us all stronger. And I think even those people, doctors and embryologists, were saying that it's stories like these that erode trust in the treatment itself. And that by being so defensive about it or denying it, the industry is just kind of shooting themselves in the foot. And so I actually saw a lot of people, some doctors saying, how can I help get this message out? Thank you for this reporting. Some lawmakers reached out and said, we really want to do something around this. We're going to keep fighting for it. A lot of support. The company, of course, said that it was all false and that it was inaccurate and that I'm wrong. But the facts speak for themselves. And
Yeah. So this is the part of the show where usually I ask people where they can find you on the internet. But since the show came out, you've had a big life change. Can you give us some context for what you're doing now?
Yes, I am actually in France right now, in a tiny little country town outside of Lyon in pastry school. And it's been a lifelong dream of mine to open a bakery. And I just always thought I was going to do it when I'm older. I'm going to get to it. But if there's anything that this reporting taught me is that life is way too short and that you got to just go chase your dreams while you can, while you're alive and kicking and cute. And I really, I was so emotionally invested in this reporting because of how many women I spoke to that just never really felt heard by anybody. And that left such an impression on me that if and when I have kids, I don't know that it's in my plan, but I kind of want to be the sort of person that my nieces and nephews are proud of, chasing their dreams. So here I am.
It's amazing. And we will link to your Instagram, which is fantastic. You can see all your pastry creations, everything. So thank you so much for coming on the show to talk about this. We have had a lot of people who wanted an episode, and this felt like a really great way for us to talk about IVFs in a way that people will understand the larger culture around it, and also hopefully be able to ask better questions in their own journeys. So thank you again.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks for listening to the Culture Study Podcast. Today, paid subscribers got a bonus conversation about the origin story for Melody and me, which includes a fantastic moment about how Melody knew that we had gone from just co-workers to friends. If you want to support the show and always get that bonus content, head to patreon.com/culturestudy. It's just $5 a month or $50 a year, and you'll get ad-free episodes, an exclusive advice time segment, and weekly discussion threads for each episode. Also, even if you don't want to become a paid subscriber, be sure to subscribe to the podcast for free wherever you get your podcasts. It really makes a difference. We have so many great episodes in the works, and I promise you don't want to miss any of them. And if you want to suggest a topic, ask a question about the culture that surrounds you, or submit a question for our subscriber-only advice time segment, go to our Google form at tinyurl.com/culturestudypod or check the show notes for a link. The Culture Study Podcast is produced by me, Anne-Helen Peterson, and Melody Rowell. Our music is by Poddington Bear. You can find me on Instagram at Anne-Helen Peterson, Melody at Melodious47, and the show at Culture Study Pod.